any broker that excels in the business is the ability, I would say, go after the most active buyers in the market of your product type. And I have some colleagues that haven't paid $1 of taxes on their brokerage income because they
Welcome back to the show, everybody. Today, I've got a great guest I'm really excited about because I started off in multifamily and things have changed a little bit since then. When I got started, there wasn't any gray hair. I was much younger. So things have changed. I really want to help those that really want to consider multifamily brokerage as a career path. And for that, I got Reid Bennett. He's a CCIM. He's also the National Council Chair of Multifamily Properties for SVN, and he's based out of Chicago, one of my favorite cities. Reid, thank you for coming on today.
Joe, I appreciate being on. I've been watching your show and we've been connected for a while, and so I'm glad we're getting to connect here.
Yeah, it's really great to have you on. I think you can really bring us a lot of experience on multifamily brokerage and really help those that are considering multifamily as a career, help them find their path. So I want to start with you. Now, how did you get started in multifamily?
Oh man. So I moved to Chicago in 1999, right?
Okay.
And I graduated from University of Iowa with a very strong major called corporate fitness.
What? Okay. What the heck was corporate fitness?
Exactly. It was a new major at the time, and it was basically set up where you go into different companies and you reduce their healthcare costs by creating like health benefits for the company. When I got out of, really, I got into it because I was really into health and fitness, and exercise science was what I focused on until I got to organic chemistry, which kicked me out of the whole program. Um, so I didn't really know what I wanted to do. Both my parents were teachers, so they weren't in business, but I started taking business courses the last couple of years at Iowa, and just really enjoyed it. And my one of my roommates in college ended up buying a bunch of student housing homes. Ended up, I think he amassed like 50 some homes at University of Iowa, sold it and bought an apartment complex. And I was really intrigued by what he was doing there. And so, you know, he actually sent me a couple books to read. One of them was Rich Dad Poor Dad, which everybody probably read in 1999 and 2000. And it just made me think totally different. So at the time, I was running a personal training studio in the basement of the LaSalle Wacker building downtown Chicago. And all my clients were either real estate brokers, owners, or attorneys. And so I would just spend an hour with each of these and just grilling them, these guys, and what they're doing and all this. And I've mentioned this on a couple of podcasts, but there was one client in particular that he would come down and he'd just show me his checks from recent closings, and they were typically more than I made all year, getting up at 5 in the morning and getting home at 9:30 training people, right? So I was like, if this guy can do it, you know, this is something that I want to do. And so there was a small brokerage firm downtown Chicago I got involved with, and they were multifamily from the start. So I I say I'm not smart enough to figure out the other asset classes, but it was just something that I got involved with because I could understand. And then there were a couple times, the downturn of 2008, I thought about getting into some other asset classes because multifamily was getting crushed. But what I noticed was every asset class I was looking at, whether it was a GSA lease deal, a triple net deal, office, I was looking at medical office at the time. There were always teams that were dominating those spaces. So it's like, that's the problem with a lot of us brokers, right? Is we get the shiny object syndrome where you're like, wow, industrial's hot. Let me do industrial. But then you realize there's been guys and gals that have done industrial for 30 years. So multifamily was just something that I understood. I got a couple zip codes in Chicago, and Saturdays and Sundays I would drive up and down the streets, taking photos of all the corner walk-ups and the courtyard buildings in Chicago. At the time, I thought I was really cool because my camera would hold 99 photos, one of the first digital cameras, and I would catalog them and just start talking to owners and operators. I got in, the condo craze in Chicago hit, so I had no clue. I mean, I was selling buildings. I had no clue how to run an analysis of income and expenses. All I knew was if it was a 4 room or a 5 room, 2 bedroom, or 5 room, 1 bedroom with a dining room, the condo converters could convert it to a 5 room, two. And I had um, a laser tape measure, right? So I would just go in and I would measure the units and tell the condo buyers this is how big the units are, and then we'd be writing contracts on the hood of my car and bringing them back into the owner. I mean, it was crazy time in the early 2000s.
How did you learn the skill of putting the analytics together then? It sounds like your company maybe wasn't offering it at that point.
Yeah, our company was a dinosaur company. I was the youngest by about 25 years. So a lot of the guys that I was working with were in their 70s and 80s, and they had the old MLS like green sheets that they were going through still in 2005. And what I so I sold until the condo craze quit, right? And then that music stopped, and everybody tried to find a chair, and everything was collapsing. The investment sales, I had to start learning how to do underwrite a deal. So that's when I went and got my CCIM because it was very focused, right, on commercial real estate. And so we started taking some of the owners in Chicago and saying, look, we can sell your deal for $6-7 million and get you into an apartment complex in Northwest Indiana or an apartment complex an hour and a half outside of Chicago that's going to generate you 3 times what this deal in Chicago is getting you. And so then that's when started getting into larger and larger deals, and that's when I could,
So
yeah,
since
no
your
longer.
company didn't offer any real training, you just decided to go get your CCIM.
Yeah. Well,
Okay.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. I mean, the most training that they offered me was send everybody a letter that says, "Hey, do you want to sell your property at 123 Main? Here's my cell number. Call me."
Oh
That
my
was the
God.
training we got. Send that letter out, and then call them.
You know, sadly, Reid, there's a lot of companies that say still running that way.
Look, I coach brokers at Massimo Group across the country, right, from San Francisco to Washington D.C. to Dallas, Texas, and it's unbelievable the way people are operating, right? And you think like, oh, this is a very institutional quality firm. Everybody's doing it kind of the same way. So
Yeah, it's amazing to me, talking to a lot of agents across the country on the website. I don't know if I told you or not, but I got on the under learning. I put your first 90 days in commercial real estate. And because I just think it's so important that getting into the industry, I mean, you went pretty extreme when they weren't training you. You decided to go get your CCIM. That's unusual. Most people don't think like that. They just kind of figure out, how they're going to get a mentor or something like that. But I love the way you went at it. But
well, I went at it from a cost standpoint, right? I mean, I was like, should I go get my MBA in real estate or should I do, to learn it? And I was like, holy shit, the MBA in real estate is going to cost me like $50,000 a year with no chance of making money, right? So you're going to be at least 100,000 in the hole with zero shot of making money. Why don't I stay in brokerage with even if I don't make a deal for a year, I'm still going to be 100 grand ahead than if I went and got my MBA with an opportunity to maybe make a couple deals, which ended up happening. So that's the way I thought about that. I don't know if it was smart or not, but
I think it was. So how are you when you're doing the training now through, I want to give Rod Santomassimo a little pitch here because you guys are some of the best coaches out there. What are you guys really pitching to get young people started in multifamily commercial real estate brokerage? How are you helping them get started?
yeah. So I hired them for myself. I had a coach. Yeah, I had a coach. After being in the business for about 18 years, I was kind of stagnating, or I would have these big like up years, then down years, then up years, then down years, and my partner and I, we would sit here and we're like, okay, we had 32,573 people in our database. Who are we calling today? And I mean, are we going to take a zip code? Like, what are we doing? And so I hired them, and there were like 4 different things that came out of that, like immediately, that were worth the cost. And then, so I spent a year and a half and my coach at the time was a multifamily focused coach. And towards the end of it, it was just like, look, they just tapped me on the shoulder, said, "We need more multifamily coaches on the platform. Do you want to become a coach?" And it was a no brainer because, as you know, as you go back and teach, the processes and different things, you learn them. And then I actually got to the point where, if I'm going to be responsible for coaching other brokers, I sure as hell better be doing what I'm telling them. So it incentivized me to do that a little more. Um, and it's just, I mean, if I would have had that training when I started in 2001, I wouldn't be talking to you on this podcast. I'd be totally retired about 10 years ago.
That amazes me. And these firms that aren't doing any training, you're going to make more money if you put time and money into training an agent. You're going to make money faster. They're going to make more money, and it's a win-win for everybody. But so many brokers just won't do it. And I mean, I thank God for guys like you that are out there training these people, and Rod, and his coaching, very powerful. What skill set do you think is the most critical to become a top producing multifamily broker?
I've been thinking a lot about that one, and this is definitely not rocket science, right? I mean, a majority of the brokers are C plus students in college, if they went to college, right? Um, the quality that I think any broker that excels in the business is the ability to wallow in the monotony of the business, right? I've had guys that I've hired on my team that had an MBA. Speaking of MBA, I've had guys that were, and girls that I had a girl that had a PhD. I had a guy that was an attorney. They could not just do the simple things over and over and over and over. And they couldn't do it, and they couldn't handle rejection. So if you can understand that you're going to make 100 calls and 97 of those are either going to be a hang up or no, but the 3 out of the 100 will make you 7 figures. If you understand that and can sit there and consistently do the same thing and add value and not be looking for the deal and calling people saying, "Do you want to sell 123 Main? Do you want to sell 123 Main?" If you're adding something to them saying, "Hey, I just wanted to make sure that you were aware of X in the marketplace. There's a new change in the zoning code that's going to directly impact the value of your property." I mean, owners are going to be waiting for you to call them again for the next thing that you tell them, right? So I didn't understand that at the beginning. I didn't understand how to get into a call cadence. I didn't understand, um, how to. Well, that was the other thing. When you have a large database and you're trying to get everybody in it, and if you have 5,000 people in there, there's no way you're touching them all, right? So you'll start looking at CoStar comps, and you'll see, shoot, I know that owner and I know the buyer. And then you go in your database and you say, well, when did I talk to these guys last? It was like 20 months ago. How the hell would they ever hire me? And that's what you have to understand about consistency and wallowing in the monotony of the business. If you can do that and make it simple, you got to make it really simple because it's a simple business, but it's very hard.
It is. It is. And it's the consistency. Showing up every day, doing the right things. Cold calling's hard. How did you really get into, or how long did it take you to become a really good cold caller?
Oh shit! I don't know if I'm a good cold caller, but what I understand is, well, first off, you have to understand that people don't care if you have a shit cold call, right? And people will not remember you. So, a deal it was one of the largest commissions that we ever made, was off a botched cold call of mine. I asked for a gentleman. It was a secretary that answered the phone. I asked for the gentleman, and she said, he died after our company meeting in January. And so I was like mortified, right? So I'm like, holy shit. And it was a portfolio of multifamily assets. I'm like, I just screwed myself. But I said, look, I set it in my reminders to call back because I got her name, right? So I called back 2 weeks later. I said, Tracy, I haven't talked to anybody over there since, Bill died after the company meeting in January. She was like, "Oh, wasn't that horrible?" You know what I'm saying? So I said, so is there anything that I can do? Because as you know, I'm tracking every single multifamily asset in the market where these are. And then she said, you know what? We're selling the entire portfolio. Let me put you in contact with the people that are going to be doing that. So that came from a botched cold call, and we ended up selling two complexes right away. Um, so that what that taught me was nobody cares, nobody remembers you. I'll talk to guys that I've talked to for 13, 14, 15 years, and they're like, you're with CB, right? I'm like, no, never been with CB. They don't care. They don't care who you're with. They don't care about you. All they care about is that you know them, you know their property, and you know the marketplace that their property's in. The rest of the stuff they could care less about.
And that's the thing is, when you get into some of these brokerages, they put these young people or these new people, when I say young, I mean new, on the phones right away. They have no idea about the marketplace.
It's the worst thing in the world to do, right? And then, I mean, I still coach teams of younger brokers that are on the phones making 250 cold calls a week, and I'm like, well, what are you saying to the owner? They're like, I'm just asking them, what's going on, what's happening. I was like, I mean, this is why a lot of owners will hang up on us brokers when we're calling, because they're getting all those calls all day long that are worthless to them.
Yeah, it doesn't bring any value to them. But if you know the market, what's average days on market, what's currently on the market, list price, sale price, all of that information. A, it gives you a great conversation to have with them, and B, you can talk about properties in the area that affect the value of that particular client you're on the phone with. And if you can't do that, you're really doing a disservice to yourself and to your company. And if your company isn't giving you the training, you need to get another company. You know.
Well, then a lot of companies will give the training, right? But their training is, we're tracking your calls. You better be making 500 calls a week. You better be calling. And you're like, okay, but what do I say? Well, and then there's training out there for companies, but it's just not like killer training.
Yeah, that's why I put that the first 90 days in commercial real estate. And I've had a lot of young people that have said this has been helpful, and that in conjunction with what my company's doing. But I think it's really, you have to understand that you are an entrepreneur when you get into commercial real estate as a broker, and you're an independent contractor, and your company's there to give you guidance. If they're not giving it to you, you need to figure it out, because if you're solely commission, you go hungry pretty quick. So what is the when you first got into commercial real estate, and I'm sure like I did, I thought, oh man, I'm going to make $1 million here in the next couple of years. That's not true. But what do you think the biggest misconception that a new person think about getting into multifamily brokerage? What is that? What do you think?
Well, first off, it's exactly like you said. When I started, my goal, I said I wanted a rooftop penthouse with my own private pool downtown Chicago, and I wanted a forest green 740 IL with tan interior. Like, those are my two things I wanted when I was 23 years old. It was crazy. But what so within brokerage, you can do whatever you want. Like you just said, you're your own boss. You don't have anybody answer. You don't have to ask, hey, my kid has a soccer game I want to attend tonight. Can I leave early? There's none of that, right? My best friend from high school passed away. Can I take 2 days off for a funeral? You don't have anybody to ask. The other thing is, you don't have anybody that's going to be sitting there saying, hey, are you doing these right things? Are you getting in at this time? Are you leaving at this time? You don't have that. I mean, maybe sometimes you'll have a managing director that's going to be kind of half-assed doing that, but you have total freedom to do whatever you want. But that could also be a double-edged sword for a lot of people that don't have the motivation to sit there and do, we call it the 20-mile march. If you start at, LA and you want to get to New York, if you do 20 miles a day every day, rather than take a nap for 3 days and then say, okay, crap, now I have to do 60 miles, you're never going to do the 60 miles again. Right. And so it's the same thing where it's just like, I always started off by saying, if you talk to 8 people a day, it seems like a reasonable number, right? 8 conversations a day, that's 40 conversations a week. It seems easy, but that's tough. I mean, it's tough to have 8 legitimate conversations a day. I know some people say they have 20 a day. I don't know how they do that, but 8 a day, if you do that every week for, your career, you'll be fine. It's just the times, and I've done it myself, where I get mired down in deal maintenance, working on deals. I'm like, all right, I couldn't do it today. And then tomorrow I'm like, oh, I'll just start it next week. I've done it. It's happened to me, and it still happens to me where you just don't want to make those calls and start talking to people. But once you do, that's how you come up with the opportunities that you're going to fill your pipeline with.
Absolutely. And then making sure you take all the information down and get it in your CRM. When I started, there wasn't, a CRM was an Excel spreadsheet that you created. And, then eventually got caught up. But having that data at your disposal that you can go back to, that's very powerful because it might be your second and third or fourth or 10th conversation with somebody. And if you can relay that, we spoke all these other times and this is what we talked about, that kind of brings the history back up to them. And that really helps with the closing rate also.
Well, exactly to your point, right? So everybody's always asking me, what's the best CRM? What's the best CRM? The best CRM is the one that you're going to use. I mean, all this other stuff, the bells and whistles doesn't mean anything. If you have the person, their contact information connected to all the properties that they own, if there's a company, all the people in the company are connected to that with what you just said, the follow up. Because when I'm talking to somebody, I'm calling up Joe, I'm having the last conversation, and you always want to get something in your conversation that is unique to that person or to their conversation, because Joe's not going to remember me when I call him in 3 months or a month. Maybe even next week he's not going to remember me. But if I said, "Hey Joe, I haven't talked to you since you were at your daughter's wedding in South Carolina," even if Joe doesn't know me, right? Even if you don't know me, you're going to be like, "Well, I must know this guy because I told him about my daughter's wedding." You know what I'm saying? So you have to pick something up that you're going to just start off by saying that, and then just say, "Here's what I'm sharing with all the other multifamily owners in the market." Or the best voicemail you'll ever leave to somebody is, "Hey, I'm sure you're aware of it, but this deal that just closed down the street from yours, I just wanted to share it with you in case you didn't know about it, because it's going to have a direct impact on the value of your property." And then if you say, "No need to call me back, but here's my cell number if you ever want to chat," that's a total like, wait a minute, direct impact how? Positive, negative? I got to call this person back. You know what I'm saying? So it's just a lot of stuff.
One of our agents, he couldn't get this guy to call back, and he knew he's thinking about selling. And he followed up with a guy for a few months, and there'd been some transactions in the area. So finally, he did a broker price opinion and sent it to him, but then left the total dollar of what it was worth out. And sure enough, the guy called. He goes, "Sneaky, but what's that number?" and
Yeah.
and he told him, and he goes, "Okay." He goes, "Let's give me a call next week." And he ended up getting the listing. So yeah, it's just a smart way. Speaking of, there's one thing that closing is what I'm thinking about is, we always train how to get the lead and get the people on the phone. What is your best closing tactic?
Oh man. Well, I mean, there's, and it's a great question, because you're right. Everybody talks about, here's how you prospect, here's what you put out there to everybody, but very few people discuss all of the things that can go wrong within a transaction, because basically, as brokers, we're just problem solvers, right? Once the deal's under contract, there's going to be, we always say every deal dies 5 times. And when you're a young broker, when that first death comes of the deal, you're like, it's over, we're done. I'm always like, no, that the first one's done, let's get to the second one, because there's always going to be something that, and you just have to navigate through those. And what I like to do when I'm closing a deal is, things that come up within the transaction, I monetize it quickly, because as much as people say commercial real estate, has no emotion to it like residential does. Commercial real estate to me has way more emotion and egos involved than residential, right? You're not looking at a residential home like, what am I looking at when I look out of my kitchen window? But you're talking about dealing with some of the biggest egos in the world, right? That are in commercial real estate, right? And so if you understand how to quickly monetize a deal rather than making it be, I'm doing this on principle, which you'll always get, and then people dig their heels in. You're just saying, hey, look, this is a $23 million deal, and we're talking about a $15,000 plumbing issue that you're going to kill the deal for. monetize it quickly and be able to go back and forth. And then, for brokers, if you're saying, if they're like, no, I'm out, I need that or I'm out. And then if you're saying, look, if this $15,000 is that critical to a $23 million transaction, this is not the deal for you. Let's find a different one, back out. And then they're, oh, no, 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 don't worry about it. I'll take care of it, if they know it's a good deal for them. So there's all sorts of just different things, but it's always problem solving, and it's always monetizing what the actual problem is and then figuring out how you're going to deal with it.
Yeah, completely agree. I think a lot of the work is done before you even start working with a client, asking them the right qualifying questions. Because you see a lot of newer agents, they'll be going along and doing the showings. Yeah, I want to write an offer. Okay, let's write an offer. Haven't got the financials in place. They haven't got everything in place, and that can be frustrating. If you're a broker on the other side, you're the listing agent, and the buying agent doesn't have all this put together and hasn't prepped their client for the whole process. That's frustrating. So you really have to be, if you're going to represent a buyer, you want to make sure that you've got all the due diligence with this client done up front, get their financials in place, make sure that if you're going to step over the threshold to go show them property, that they can actually close the deal. Our guy that does George is the CEO of our company. He does this thing in the classes he does every morning. It's called DAM. It's desire, ability, means, motivation. If your client has all four of those, then go ahead and make sure you've got those financials to make sure they can close the deal. And are they motivated enough to do it now? And always say, listen, if we find you the right deal tomorrow, are you going to move forward? And just having those conversations in the beginning will help with the closings.
100%. And I would say both on the sell side and the buy side, you have to have those conversations, because even on the sell side, and it's funny because I was just I forget who I was talking to about last week, where a lot of younger brokers will get involved in a call that they last 20 minutes with a seller, and they're like, wow, I'm really getting somewhere with them. And then they tell me who that seller is. I was like, that guy wasted my time when I was 26 too. He'll talk to anybody for a half an hour, and then but has no interest or desire to sell the deal. The other thing is, especially in today's market, I mean, we're almost in June of 2025. You have to, understand their loan situation for the seller prior to doing anything, because they could want, you know, property might be worth $2 million, and they might have a $3 million loan on it right now. So you have to get that figured out real quick, otherwise you're wasting your time.
Yeah, and also, and the one thing that happened to me, Reid, is we put one property on the market just a year or two ago, and we priced it right. This buyer in an exchange came in full pop, just said, "Here it is. We want this property." Seller goes, "Wait a second. If this came in that fast, somebody else might want it for more." We're like, "No, no, 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 no,
First offer is the best offer, man.
no." And so, if you're new and listening to this, just know when you get somebody that says that, and we pre-qualify, we push them, doing all of our due diligence ahead of time. We ask them, "Listen, if we bring you a deal right away, and because we had this buyer in the pocket anyway." And so it was a shock. And then he did not sell it to him, and they never got even. He ended up cutting the. We lost the listing. We listed it for a while, couldn't get anybody to come back.
But you bring up a good point though. So if you are maybe a newer broker, or you don't have a bunch of listings, I would say go after the most active buyers in the market of your product type, and talk to them and meet with them and say, look, I am tracking every deal. If I find exactly what you said, if I find you this deal, if you can get them to pay your fee, it's even better, because then you can be telling the owners, look, I'm not fishing for a listing here. I have a buyer that will take care of any fees associated with my services. Will you look at an offer? And then that buyer is like, okay, you're not like every other broker calling me trying to pitch for a listing. You know, you can turn that into a listing. Should you deliver the offer, you get in there, it's not quite there, and then you say, Mr. Seller, normally I'm looking to deliver 23 offers to you. This was my one shot. You didn't want to list it. The other thing is if they will not list with you, if they will not pay any kind of a fee, a seller, you have no fiduciary responsibility to them at that point, right? So now you're trying to just get the lowest the lowest price for your buyer, which that's what the sellers that don't list with a qualified broker don't understand that. They think they're saving a fee.
Oh, or a discounted broker. You know, there's a deal we're working on right now with one of our agents, and the commission's about half of what it should be. And the client found it, so he is representing the deal. But you know, this cutting fee stuff, I don't know if that's happening in Chicago or not, but it leaves a bad taste in everybody's mouth.
Well, this is the time, and I remember it happened, in 2008 and nine, where everybody gets, when the deal volume drops, brokers either leave the business or they get desperate and start slashing their fees, you know, cut off their nose to spite their face kind of thing. And once they start doing that, then certain sellers get, well, this guy is willing to do, this $5 million deal for 1%, and you get that. But I've also had owners that I've been talking to for years and always are asking me questions and I'm always giving them information. I had this one particular owner he always calls me, probably called me every month for like 3 years to ask what's going on in the market, what's happening. I see your listings come out, this, that, and the other. You're going to be my guy when I sell. And then he started asking me questions about that were kind of related to closing a transaction. And I was like, it was a really weird question. I forget what it was about. Who pays for the appraisal kind of thing or something like that. And I was like, Jeff, do you have your deal under contract? And he actually said, yes, I do. I'm going direct, so I'm saving a brokerage fee. And I was like, what do you have it under contract for? And he said, 2.3 million bucks. I said, I could have got you three all day long. So whatever brokerage fee you saved, you just lost $700,000. And then the guy retraded him, last minute anyway, so he even lost any more than that. So it's a crazy perception that's out there with discount brokers, but I don't fault a lot of owners because there's so many brokers that are out there adding zero value to them on their calls, right? So they get used to that.
It is. How are you? How long you been in brokerage?
I got my license in 2001 and my first full year was 2002.
Okay. And how are you standing out now? What are you doing to stand out in your marketplace?
So what we do is, again, it's going to be working, niching down. I don't sell anything other than workforce housing and affordable housing. If anything else comes in my purview, I either refer it out or I just say that's not what we deal with. I don't chase the shiny object. I stick with that. So um, most people understand that that's what I do. I try to put that out on social media, email blast, phone calls, and then once you have everybody that understands exactly what you do, it just makes it a little more easier. So I would say niche early, figure out what you want. So what do they say? The riches are in the niches. I mean, you have to stick with something. And there are a few people out there that are in smaller geographical markets that have to be jack of all trades, but which is fine, but because you're niching geographically and you know everything that's going on, you know the mayor, you know every single parcel, that's a niche. But if you're in a larger secondary or definitely primary, if you're not niching,
Yeah, I agree. You see on LinkedIn, multifamily, retail. You're like, okay, or residential. They do residential as well. You're like, so what are you good at? Is the first thing that comes.
that's a great point. So I mean, so there are two different. If I'm going into a new market where I have a client that says, "Look, I'm leaving Chicago. I want to be in South Carolina." I go into two different places. I see who in my company first is in South Carolina and specializes in that. So if I go on the website and somebody I specialize in office, industrial, retail, multifamily, leasing, I'm like, nope, you're done. Same thing with the CCIM database. If somebody because a lot of people are like, well, if I don't put it all down there, I'm going to miss a deal. It's the exact opposite. If you put a specific niche, you're going to make way more deals and have people reaching out to you significantly more than if you're trying to cover all bases.
Yeah, if you're trying to be everything to everybody, you're going to be nothing.
Nothing to nobody.
It just, you see it so often in our industry, and they're just afraid to miss a deal. Well, you're missing a lot of deals in your niche. If you just focus on it, become the go-to person in that area, write blogs about it, write articles about it, content creation, be and networking, it'll really help you get ahead. So let's talk about what's going on in the multifamily market right now. You've got, it seems like it's staying pretty strong right now, right?
It's very strong. I mean, if you're asking me about what's going on in the market, it depends on the market, right? It also depends on whether you're a buyer or a seller too. So, but the main overall arching metrics that we're seeing in the multifamily space and what we've seen over the last 24 months has been, multifamilies remain really robust on the metrics as far as the operating. So, tenants are not moving into homes like they were in previous cycles because there's zero inventory, because anybody that has a sub 3% 30-year fixed mortgage isn't leaving their house. So they're not selling. And then anybody that can buy a house is now looking at a 6.5-7% mortgage, and they can't afford it. So it's keeping everybody in multifamily. So all the owners are now saying, well, shoot, I'm raising my rents on the renewals $150 a month, and I'm 98% occupied. So then the buyers are coming in saying, well, based on today's debt, here's where my debt service coverage ratio is. This is what I can afford to pay. And the seller's going, I'm not selling for that. I'm crushing it. So there's been a big buy versus sell gap that hasn't closed a lot, but what we're starting to see is people are now realizing it's a new normal. We're not going to be going back to 3% money anytime soon. In fact, we might be creeping back up. And so sellers are saying, okay, this is the new normal. Then you have to start thinking about, what can I do with the funds if I'm able to sell my asset for the value of what it's worth? I'm going to be able to buy an asset for today's value too. So it's still been slow. The deal volume has been down across the country, probably about 67% from the heyday of 2021 and 22. But those were the most ridiculous 2 years I've ever been in the business, right? I mean, you just get somebody to think about selling and you can find a contract on that deal. So this is now,
The people that bought it still own it.
yeah, right. But from an activity standpoint, to give you an example of a real time, we have a 200 unit deal that we just did a call for offers on, that 2 years ago, 10 years ago, we would have had 23 to 30 offers. We got 4. And of those 4, 2 might be real. Everybody else is like, I'm waiting. I'm waiting. So it's like, it's a lot different than it was. But there are still opportunities in every single market. And I think right now is going to be a huge buy opportunity for most people that are afraid to do something with the volatility in the marketplace and in the political world.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people are just not going to be able to refi with what they bought it with a few years ago. They're going to give it back to the bank, or somebody's going to come in and steal it. Um, if you had to do it all over again, Reid, would you go with multifamily as the asset class of your choice?
If I had to do it all over again, I think I'd be a Formula One racer, but I'm not short enough for that. But
You know what? I was watching it just the other night. I'm like, these guys.
those guys, they have the life. Yep, yeah. No, if I had to do a lot, I would pick multifamily, and um, knowing what I know now, obviously, it would I would make way more calls when I was younger. I would understand exactly what to say to add value, and I would do that as much as possible, and um, not worry about doing all the other details. It's just talking to people and adding value to them up front, because when you do that and show somebody that you understand them and can add value to what they're interested in, you'll be 7-figure plus producer in no time.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is the most amazing business. I think if you're getting into it and think about, this is going to be my career, you just need to find the right brokerage that gives you the right training and mentoring if you can. And,
Yeah.
you know,
Well, and one other thing that I would suggest, I actually have a couple of my clients have asked me to talk with their kids as they're
mhm,
thinking about getting into the business, and I'm
yeah,
telling them what this business affords you from a tax standpoint and a real estate professional status standpoint
yep,
is something that I didn't learn early enough, right? So, and I have some colleagues that haven't paid $1 of taxes on their brokerage income because they bought positions in real estate, accelerated the depreciation, and it washes their brokerage income 100%. So, why, and there's still years when I'm writing, a six-figure check to the government where if you take that six-figure check that you'd be writing, put it down on a piece of real estate, cost segregate it, accelerate the depreciation, it washes your tax liability and then gives you equity into a deal that's going to obviously, well, hopefully appreciate, So that's what I would do if I did it all over again.
yep, it's a smart way to go. So what's next for you, Reid?
I'm gonna continue to grow our team here in Chicago. I'm gonna, hopefully as long as I can be in the business. That's the other thing. This is the business where you can do it until you're 102, and it's exciting. And I know. I mean, my mentor did it until he was 87 or 88, and it was like once it's in your blood, it's just something that you can transition into either looking at deals from an ownership standpoint or continuing to mentor and build a team. But it's just something I'll be in forever.
It's a great business. I love it. Reid, thank you for taking the time to come on today. Thank you for all this insight. I mean, I think somebody that's really thinking about multifamily as a path can really learn a lot. But how do we get in touch with you?
Well, the easiest way is to find me on LinkedIn. It's the first thing that pops up when you Google me, or anybody else for that matter. Reach out that way. You can also find me on the SVN website, or my cell phone is all over there as well. Google or Chat GPT.
All right, we'll even put it down in the below the video too. So, Reid, thank you very much for coming on today. Okay,
All right, Joe. Appreciate it, man. Nice meeting with you.
it was nice talking to you as well. And for those of you watching, if you could, please give us a like, and if you haven't done so, make sure you subscribe.